Hi there! Today's video lesson is about the Victoria sponge cake or Victoria sandwich cake. It's a cake that should be in every good cook's repertoire, and you can make it as simple as you like with just a dusting of sugar on top, or you can really splash out and fancy it up. So let's see how we get on. Okay, the first stage in a successful Victoria sponge is to decide on your cake tin. So remember how to measure a cake tin. Get a ruler. Here's 7 inches or 18 centimetres, and that is the diameter of the widest part of this cake tin. Now this is the size for the recipe that is in your recipe book. However, the most common size of cake tin is a bit larger, not 7 inches, but 8 inches or 20 centimetres. So you're more likely to have this size, but do check, and it makes a difference. If you use your recipe book recipe in this tin, you'll end up with 2 very thin biscuits that you can sandwich together because the tin is bigger. So if I just show you, there you go, that's the difference in size between the 7 and the 8-inch tin. Not massive, but enough to really affect the outcome of your cake. So if you want to use an 8-inch tin, then you need to use the second set of ingredients on the screen, which is 4 eggs. So for 8-inch tins today, I'm going to go for a 4-egg mixture. Now I need to prepare the tins. What I'm going to use today is something I would really recommend if you do a lot of baking, cake release spray. It saves all the faff of greasing, but obviously greasing is another option. If you're going to grease your tins, just get your fingers in some butter and really rub it around, or even a little bit of oil, rub it around all the sides and make sure you get into the corners of your tin because that's where it's most likely to stick. If you have got a tin that doesn't have a removable base, or sometimes even if you do, you might want to cut out a circle of greaseproof paper and place it in the base of the tin. Now these tins of mine have got a removable base, which makes it easier to get the cake out of the tin when it's finished baking. If yours doesn't have a removable base, you definitely need the greaseproof paper in there. But today, I'm just going to give mine a quick spray. There we go. And that will be enough just to allow the cakes to pop straight out of the tin. So in my bowl I have added 225 grams of caster sugar and 225 grams of butter. So altogether that comes up to 450 grams. I have got very soft butter, so that it can mix more easily. Now, Victoria sponge belongs in the creaming family of cakes. We're creaming the fat with the sugar to give us a really light, fluffy, spongy, airy texture. So this first stage is very important. I've got to get air into the mixture, and we'll do that by using an electric whisk. You can do this with a wooden spoon, but it takes quite a lot of muscle power. I'm starting on a low speed, so I don't want great chunks of butter flying around the kitchen. If the butter was cold, it would be too hard to start mixing in with the sugar. And I just end up with bits flying everywhere. So make sure your butter's at room temperature. After a minute or two on a low speed, I've got it so it looks like one mixture rather than two different substances. Now I can start to increase the speed, and I want to keep going until the mixture becomes much lighter in colour and more like a mousse. I stop every now and then to just scrape down the sides of the bowl so that the mixture all gets beaten. It's really important when you're using an electric mixer, keep the blades pointing downwards, don't tilt them like this, otherwise you'll start firing bits at the ceiling and your face. So keep the blades in the bowl, and always turn the blades off before you then tip the machine on its side to stand it while you're scraping down or doing whatever else you need to do. So remember that although these blades are not sharp, if they catch your finger while they're moving extremely fast, so they can cause serious injury. And obviously, if you've got long hair, you do not want your long hair getting anywhere near those moving blades. So make sure your hair is well up and out of the way before you start using your whisk. Okay, final stage coming up. Can you see we've got a nice pale coloured moussey texture in there, nice and light, plenty of air in there. Now the trick for the next stage is making sure that we don't lose the air again. We need to keep that in our mixture. So time to move on to the next stage of mixing, which is to add the eggs. I've also had my eggs out of the fridge for a while so that they've come to room temperature. Expert baker's advice is that your eggs should be at room temperature when you're using them in cakes. So 4 eggs, I'm going to crack them into a jug first and then beat them lightly together before I add them to the mixture. Doesn't matter if the yolks break when you're cracking them. Only thing you want to watch out for is you probably don't want bits of eggshell in the jug. I'm just going to mix the eggs lightly with a fork. Now, sometimes there is a problem with Victoria sponge mixture or any sponge cake mixture. When you add the eggs, the mixture can start to curdle. When it curdles, you see lots of little lumps floating around. Looks a bit more like scrambled egg. We don't want curdling to happen. So actually, before I add the eggs, I'm going to measure out my self-raising flour, because that will help me to prevent curdling from taking place. Today I'm also going to add a little bit of extra raising agent because I want to make sure I get a good rise. So I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of baking powder to my mixture as well. It says in the recipe to sieve the flour, and this is because we don't want any lumps in the flour. Also, sieving it helps to get a bit of air into the flour, and remember, we're all about having a light fluffy mix with this. So the way to do this as easily as possible is to put your bowl and your sieve onto the scales and then turn them on. If you do that, you'll find that you've got a 0 measurement on the scales. So now we can add the flour. When you are getting a teaspoon of baking powder, it's important to make sure your teaspoon is level unless the recipe says otherwise. That is a heaped teaspoon, so that's too much. All I need to do is run my finger carefully over the top so that the excess goes back in. That's now exactly right, a level teaspoon. So I'm going to add that into my flour. And then all I need to do is very gently sift my flour into the bowl. Do it by tapping the sieve against your hand gently. Self-raising flour is often very fine and creates a cloud of dust. There'll be a few little crumbs left at the end. Just gently with your finger break them down. Push them through. Right, that'll do. So back to my mixing then. So I'm going to take some of the egg mixture and pour it in, a bit at a time. Take my whisk, and again starting on a slow speed, beat it in. No curdling yet, but to prevent it happening, I'm going to take my flour and bicarbonate of soda mixture, and I'm just going to sprinkle in a tablespoonful of that. Now I'll add a bit more egg. And mix again. A little bit more flour. The rest of the egg mixture. And mix again. I've finished with my mixer now, so I can switch that off at the wall and detach the blades. There we go, ready for washing up. Now my next step is to add in a little bit of vanilla essence, for extract rather. Not too much, about half a teaspoon is right for a 7-inch cake, up to 1 teaspoon. I'm not going to do quite a full teaspoon for this cake. It's an 8-inch cake. And now we come to the folding in part. When you're folding in, the tool you want is the largest metal spoon that you can find, ideally. If you haven't got a large metal spoon, something like a wooden spatula will do fine. But you want something that's not like a thick wooden spoon, and you don't want it too small, because the idea is that as we mix the flour in, we're going to move the mixture as little as possible so that we don't lose all that precious air that we've been whisking into it. We're not going to add the flour all at once. So I'll take a big spoonful of it and I'm going to move it round, but not really stir it. Can you see how I'm moving it in a figure of 8 motion? Very gently. Now, sometimes people wonder why you bother with the creaming method as opposed to just using the all-in-one method where you stick all your ingredients in together and whisk them up just all in one go. Well, the all-in-one method is a fine method of making cakes, but it does rely on you using more raising agent because you're not spending all this effort working the air into the mixture. So instead, to get your sponge to rise, you would need to add more baking powder. The problem with adding more baking powder is that after a certain level, it tastes, you can taste it in the cake. So after a certain point, it's not a good thing because it's not a very nice flavour. If you don't believe me, go and dampen your finger and stick it in a pot of baking powder and then taste. And I can virtually guarantee you, you will not be very happy with the outcome. So although baking powder is good in cakes because it makes them rise, it doesn't have a very nice flavour. So as soon as the flour disappears and I can't see it anymore, I stop mixing. Definitely a time to be gentle. The flour is going to give the cake its structure. So the little bits of sponge that are around the edges of all those millions of air bubbles are largely made of flour. There's a little bit of flour at the bottom. There we go. Last addition, in it goes. If I wanted to make this a chocolate Victoria sponge, I would have replaced 25 grams of the flour with 25 grams of cocoa. Be enough to give me a nice chocolate sponge. There we go. No flour left. So the consistency I'm looking for is a soft batter. It should, when I shake the spoon, gently drop off quite happily. If you have to shake like really vigorously to get it to fly off, then you can soften the mixture by adding a little bit of milk at a time. And by a little bit of milk, I mean like a tablespoon. Add a little bit of milk and then stir it gently. And as soon as you get to that soft dropping consistency, it's time to move on to the next step, which is to put these cakes in their tins. To put the mixture into the tins, it is really worth, if you've got a silicone spoon or a silicone spatula, using that to help you get every last bit of mixture out of the bowl and into the tins so that your cakes are as large as possible. I'm going to start with my metal spoon that I was folding the flour in with, and I'm just going to make sure I'm even by dolloping a spoonful into each tin in turn. My oven has been preheating to 180 degrees because mine's a fan oven. 190 if you don't have a fan oven. And I need to make sure that it's up to temperature before these cakes go in. If I put them into a cold oven, I'm not going to get a good cake out at the end. Right, we're nearly done. Time for the silicone spoon. There we go. And now, using the back of the spoon, I'm just going to push the cake into the tin, making sure that it goes down into all those bottom corners. Turning the tin as I go. Now, it doesn't matter if the top of your cake is not 100% smooth. It will rise more in the middle, so if you can, try and get a dent, a slight dent in the middle, and push it out towards the edges a bit, but really don't fuss too much about it. It will even itself out. And then last thing, before it goes in the oven, whack it on the surface a couple of times. What you're trying to do is make sure that any air bubbles down at the bottom are dislodged. So that's the first one. Here's the second one. Push it out. Turning the tray as we go. You can see my tray is about half filled up. Each tin is about half filled up. But the cake will rise and should be coming up to the tops of each tin by the time it comes out the oven, so it will rise a long way. Oh, there's a gap there. Push it in. Smooth the top. And those are ready to go into the oven for about 25 minutes for an 8-inch tin, about 20 minutes for a 7-inch. Start checking at 20 minutes after a 7-inch one has gone in. Okay, let's get them in the oven to bake. So here we are after exactly 25 minutes, just got them out of the oven using my oven gloves. And how do we test if these cakes are done? Well, you can see the colour is good. You may be able to see, if I move in a bit, that around the edge of the tin it's started to come away from the edge of the tin. That's also another good sign. And then finally, if with my finger I just lightly push in the middle, it goes down but it springs back. And this one, okay, don't dig your finger right into it, just lightly push, and if it feels springy, that means it is done. You can also get a skewer and gently point your skewer into the middle of the cake, into the thickest part. If your skewer comes out clean, then it will tell you that all the mixture has set. You haven't got any raw mixture left in the middle. If there's still a bit of cake mixture clinging to the skewer when you pull it out, or chopstick or whatever you use, then it needs to be back in the oven. Really important not to open the oven while the cakes are cooking. The more you open the oven, the more cold air goes in and the whole thing will collapse in the middle. So I'm going to let these cool for a few minutes, and then I will come back and we will think about how we're going to sandwich them and decorate them. My cakes have cooled down a bit. Now it's time to get them out of the tin. With a loose bottom tin, you need something like this to help you. Doesn't matter what's in the can, just a can. The tin still feels a little bit warm, but I can pick it up okay. Balance your tin on top of the can and then gently and evenly push down around the edges. And eventually, with a little bit of care, you should find that the ring drops down. Now I just have my cake resting on the base of the tin, and I can lift it off cleanly and pop it back on the cooling rack to finish cooling completely. Whilst I wait for the cakes to finish cooling, I can make my topping. Today I'm going to make a plain chocolate ganache. So I've got about 100 grams of plain chocolate, cooking chocolate, really cheap. Doesn't need to be the high quality stuff. In fact, Mary Berry recommends the lower quality stuff. This one has got 56% cocoa content. And to that, I'm going to add some double cream, the sort that you can pour. And I want about 100 mils, which is about a third of this tub. Which is about that much. And I'm going to make this topping in the microwave. I'm going to heat the mixture for short bursts in the microwave just until the chocolate is melted. So here's the finished result. I heated it on high power for 2 bursts of just 30 seconds each and gave it a good stir between each. And then the chocolate had completely melted and you get this beautiful glossy thick icing. It will thicken up more as it cools down. So I'm now ready to fill my cakes and prepare them for this very rich dark chocolate topping. First of all, select a suitable size plate for your cake to sit on, and then you need to decide which one's going to be the bottom layer, which one's going to be the top layer. This one I think is just slightly better, slightly thicker, so that's going to be my top layer. I'm going to take this one and turn it over, put it top side down onto my plate. Then I'm going to spread my filling. I'm using classic strawberry jam filling today. And I'm simply going to spoon it on and spread it out. I'm not going to go right to the very edge because I don't want it oozing out all over the plate, but I'm going to go quite close. So I do want to be able to see the jam from the sides of the cake. There we go, so I've just left the tiniest border around the edges. Now I can put my top layer on, right way up. And now if I wanted to do a very simple finish, I would just dust some icing sugar over the top here and leave it at that. But as I've prepared my chocolate ganache, I need to go a couple of stages further. First of all, I'm going to seal the top of the cake with a little bit of apricot jam. But I'm just going to heat up in a small saucepan a couple of tablespoons of apricot jam, and then using a pastry brush, when it's gone a bit runny, I will just brush it over the surface of the cake. So here is my runny, smooth apricot jam. It's really the like edible varnish that I'm applying to the top of the cake. Oops, a bit of a lump there. After 10 minutes or so of cooling and stirring with my spatula, the icing has become more solid, less runny, more gloopy, I suppose. So it's now ready to apply to the cake. I don't think it'll come pouring off the sides. Do you know what? If it dribbles off the sides, I won't be that upset about it. Whatever you do, you must not be tempted to cool down your ganache in the fridge. If you do that, you'll lose the gloss. And look at the gloss. What a glossy icing this is. Very gently, I'm going to encourage it to move towards the edges of the cake. The last bit towards the edge of the cake is slightly downhill, so I don't probably have to push it all the way. Let's see if I can keep it on the top. And the apricot jam at this stage is still sticky, so will help to stick the icing where it's supposed to be, instead of allowing it to cascade off the edges. Do you know what? Considering I'm doing this under pressure on camera, I am not at all displeased with the outcome. Right, okay, I'm going to stop faffing with that. Final touch for that British Bake Off appearance. Some fresh raspberries, yes. So I'm going to pick them out one by one and dot them into the icing. This icing will set. I want to actually leave some of the glossiness still apparent, so I'm not going to cover the surface with raspberries. Let's hope they don't fall off. Also, this is a really handy way to divide your cake into portions. So if I want 12 portions, basically I need to set my cake out a bit like a clock face. And there we are. That is my finished Victoria sponge cake with strawberry jam filling, chocolate ganache and raspberry